let's just sew whatever.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be making the Regina Phalange from Sincerely Jen Patterns. If you are wondering why such a ridiculous name, Jen names all of her patterns after the show Friends references. So that's Phoebe Buffay's fake name, essentially. So I've got all my materials here. I'm going to be using some Decaville Light, some Decaville Heavy. I've got my exterior fabrics here. I am using all vinyl for my exterior. I'm doing a luxe vinyl that I'll be carrying on my website soon. It's like pretty beautiful sage green. I love it. This mid-weight luxe vinyl in Garden Splash small scale. This vinyl, if you've not used it before, has a very similar weight to cork. So it's domestic friendly, it's easy to use, and it has some structure without needing interfacing. So it's absolutely one of my favorites to use. And then for my lining, I'm going to be using Renew Canvas, which is made from recycled water bottles, and it is one that I saw on my website. It is in no way, shape, or form waterproof. Just keep that in mind. So, yeah, I've got my hardware here also picked out. I have a 1-inch wide mouth slide adjuster since I'll be using vinyl for my strap. 1-inch lever snap hooks. These are some of my absolute favorites. I just love the way they work. 1-inch simple square rings, and then 2 triangle rings in 1-inch. All of the hardware you can purchase on my website if you would like. You don't have to, but I do sell all these materials on my website except the interfacing and the pattern. So I'm going to grab a little project bin from over here. I like to keep my hardware in a little container so I don't lose anything, and then all my pieces when they're ready to go in a little bin. Let's see what's in here. Dorothy, there's my pens. I wondered where these went. Dorothy was sitting on my cutting table helping me cut out the other day, and she was like, "What do you need? I'll put it in this container." So sweet. But also I was like, don't touch my stuff. So this little container is also available on my website. It says so whatever, has the little fabric design, but yeah, it's just a fun little place to keep the items you're going to need. We're also going to need some zipper tape and zipper pulls, but I'll get those when we sew it together. So I turned on my heat press earlier so it's nice and warm. I'm going to go ahead and start by cutting out my interfacing and then working on the pieces that need interfacing, and then we'll go from there. The pattern pieces do not have cut sizes on them, but the cut chart has the size if it is a rectangle or square or something you can cut with a rotary cutter and ruler, so you can refer to that. This pattern does have 3 sizes, small, medium, and large, and I'm not saying I wouldn't recommend the large, but it's a very specific need if you're going to cut out the large. That's all I'm going to say. So we can look down at the bottom. It says from Decaville Heavy. We're going to need to cut exterior bottom accent pieces and then our exterior bottom panel stabilizer. So we'll go ahead and do that. Got my rotary cutter and ruler. I'm going to measure out. And I'm going to slightly overcut so that I can square it up. I'll be honest, these bottom pieces are going to be pretty important to have the size perfect, because this is going to give your bag structure and really help it with the shape. And then I'll leave that on my heat press to kind of warm it up. I'm not touching it to the heat press, of course, but there's a little scrap piece. Put all my pens back together. All right, and then we're going to need 2 total of those. I think if you really wanted to, you could add some Decaville Heavy to the bottom interior of the bag, just to give yourself like a really sturdy base, but it's really not necessary. If you would like separate interfacing pieces, what you can do is cut two or print two sets of the bottom panel essentially out and go from there, but I just cut around and I'm folding it out of the way and I'm tracing around. If I can, I like to use cardstock for my pattern pieces. It just helps you trace them a little bit easier, helps them last a little bit longer. So lining that up. I'll go ahead and cut that out. Could use a rotary cutter if you wanted to, but just use a nice pair of scissors. All right, so those are the three pieces on the list for Decaville Heavy. And so I'll put this away. And then I'll cut out my Decaville Light. I have a large container of these little scrappy pieces. Container, bag, whatever. Whatever it is. Okay, so we're gonna need our side panels and our top exterior contrast. Yeah. And then our base, we'll need to cut out of vinyl so I can move that over there. Okay. So I'm going to start with the side panel. Again, you could go ahead and you could print out two sets, but I am just folding my excess out of the way as I trace. But I mean, it would definitely be easier. So I'm tracing the sides and the bottom, and not yet the top. And I'm only going to how tall that dashed line is. Because then what I'll do is I'll just trace this curve at the top. Again, totally not the most ideal way to do it, but it works. And then when I'm cutting that out, I do my best to cut on the line, not quite outside of it. And if you have to, cut slightly inside of it. Otherwise, you're adding a little extra interior seam allowance than you need if you take into account the width of the pen. There's that. Now, I think this little scrap here might be big enough. Yep. So Decaville Light. then this is little scraps that I can use for something else. Might save that one for something less rectangular. Again, I truly don't remember where I got these, but I'm glad I have them. They've come in handy. I just found them in my drawer. And I was like, oh, great. Those over there. And now, yes, perfect. Got that piece I can trace. And you do not want to omit that Decaville light from the side panels. It gives so much structure to the bag. If you are making this with cotton fabric, I would highly recommend the Decaville light, as it's going to help keep its shape. But Jenny does write for all cotton bags for the most part. So just keep that in mind when you're picking your materials. All right. And that's it for the interfacing that I'm going to be adding. So all of that interfacing is going to go on our accent pieces so that I can quickly turn off my heat press. I'm going to start in by cutting my accent pieces. I think I have a fairly straight edge on this side, so I can cut my crossbody strap first. I think I want to do a double-sided strap. These together are just so pretty. They're time consuming, but they're worth it. So I'm going to cut this to 2 inches wide, and then I'll cut my other to 1.5 inches wide. So this is not part of the pattern. It's my own little change. But I'm just taking my ruler, sliding it up, and I'm creating a straight edge like that. I'll come back for the rest of it. Keep it in the same composition if you can, and then we'll do 2 inches wide now that we've got like a fresh edge. Just slow, trying to move the pressure as you go. And what's kind of fun about the Luxe backing is it wants to stick to itself because it's like a microfiber. So when you're doing something like this, it really helps it stay in place. And then we can go ahead and measure down the center, a 1-inch line. Sorry, now I'm thinking, do I want double-sided handles for the rest of the bag? And I think I do. Okay, so I'm gonna use, I've been using the 3/4 inch wide tape lately to create my straps like this. It just gives me that much more surface area. I would not do it on a 3/4 inch wide strap. I think that would just be a little bit overkill, kind of make it harder to fold. But if your machine hates double-sided tape, I would say don't do this. Probably not a great idea. So there's that. And then thinking about our handles, they want to be on average, they want to be 16, and I love that, but I think I'm going to try 18. Sorry. Let's see. Ah, perfect. So I've already cut my crossbody strap, so now I can start to cut into the length of the vinyl instead of the width. When you're planning your project, it is super helpful to keep that in mind so that you save yourself enough for a crossbody strap, if not now, then in the future. So I'm going to cut this to 2 inches wide by 18. You could also do the 16 that the pattern has written for. They are adorable. But I think she has notated as well, if you want a shoulder handle instead of a grab handle, that you'd want to cut that longer, maybe 18, not 18, but maybe 24 or 27. I think for myself personally, it just cuts into the proportion of the bag. So I don't always cut my handles to be the most effective for every user. I prioritize the fashion of it over the function myself, unless it's a custom order. So we need a set of those, and then we'll need a set from our accent cut to like 1.5 or 1.75. So that's why that little cover's on the tape, because it's so sticky, but meh, it's fine. So there's that. I also have some just packing tape over my cut list so that as I'm going, I can cross it off. So like I cut out my handles, but I still need to cut 2. I cut out my adjustable crossbody strap, but I still need to cut out my exterior fabric, and I don't need anything else out of this vinyl, because I think I want to do my handle connectors out of the flower fabric. I think it'd be so pretty. So we're going to need our zipper overlay, our exterior top, exterior side, exterior bottom, but the rest is going to be my printed vinyl. We're going to need the base, and I think that's it, because I'll do my zipper panel out of that and my lining and etc. So since some of these pieces are going to be traced and some are just going to be cut, I'll go ahead and cut the ones with my ruler that I don't need to trace, and then I'll flip it over and trace the others on the back side. Okay, so I'm getting my exterior bottom accent cut. I'll lay that on my heat press. And I wrote down from the cut list onto my pattern piece, but of course you could just trace the pattern piece if cutting with a ruler and rotary cutter is not your strong suit. There's that. And now I cut my 2 exterior and my 2 Duckaville heavy, so I'm done with that. And I can just store this away. I don't need it anymore. So we've got our next one here, 1 to 10. Measure twice, cut once, right? And then a zipper end is given in fabric, but I'm gonna go ahead and use a zipper end hardware piece. That's just my preference in the way it looks. There's that. So there are my 2 rectangular pieces. We'll go ahead and flip this over. I always like to check to make sure there's no flaws on the front side of my vinyl as well. But Flip that over. I've got a nice little section here. I can do my zipper overlay. And what's nice about the Luxe backing is, again, it has that little bit of grip to it, so it's gripping onto my cardstock, making it a little easier, with gentle pressure, of course, to trace. So there's that. I only need the one. You could add two if you wanted and call it a day, but it's good there. We need our bottom panel, which I'm just seeing if it would work right here. I'm gonna add a little bit more tape to this as well. Help keep it together. Again, this is why it's just easier to print out two. But I didn't. I'm stubborn. I was like, no, just cut it. It's fine. Okay, so I'm just going to trace the center line really quick. Move it over. Make sure it won't work. So I'm not going to do that. I'll put that up here. But I can cut these. And I also like to make sure that I don't have any overcuts where I'm about to trace. Otherwise you could kind of more or less ruin your project. And now the vinyl I'm using for my exterior has no direction. It's not directional. So I can go ahead and trace this in the opposite angle of the other side panel, which just kind of helps eliminate fabric waste. Not by a lot, but just by a little. All right, so that's it for this pattern piece. And try to make sure you get that definition in the side panel with that straight line and then that curved edge. It really help you define your seam allowances when you start to sew this together. Okay. And then I'm going to rough cut the overlay from my fabric. And then we'll cut the exterior bottom panel. I don't know why I keep flipping it over. It's the same size either way. But again, check for those overcuts. If you need to, you can like mark it with a pen. And if you're not sure what I mean by overcuts, it's kind of what I've made up to describe when you overcut with your rotary cutter. And if those sneak past your allowed seam allowance, it can weaken the integrity of your bag. Okay. So cutting out the bottom panel. This is going to be it for what needs interfaced. So I can put this away. Oops. I'll get all my pieces off the heat press. And what's kind of cool is my side panel Decaville light is almost a little bit tacky. So it'll be easy to kind of set that down, keep it in place. If you're worried about your interfacing shifting, you can just gently press it to the top of your heat press and let it melt a little bit from the heat. And then when you go to press it, it's not going to shift. And then we'll give that about 10 seconds. And then let that sit flat for a little while to rest. I know some people say they prefer to wait 24 hours to let the glue really set before messing with your pieces, but All right, so we'll center the Decaville light onto the top panel. And if you wanted to, you could possibly use like a glue stick to stick these down first, but I don't know if that would interfere with the adherence of the interfacing. And if you're worried you're going to burn your fingers or something, I just kind of use the tips of my fingernails to hold it up there, let the glue warm up a little bit, and then set it down and press it. Okay. Like I said, this will be it for our interfacing pieces. They'll have time to cool and set while we cut out the rest of the bag. And I can turn off my heat press. Oh, I still need to do the base. That's okay. And then even if I have some pieces later on that need to be kind of like ironed the wrinkles out, I can still do that. The heat press will still be kind of warm. So it'll be okay. This color is so pretty. Alrighty. I'll cut the detailed piece out in a little bit, and we can start with this. Now, before I get started, I know I'm going to need to cut those handle accents. And we know we need to start with our crossbody strap. And I want that to be 1.75 by the length of the vinyl. If you wanted to do that same 2 inches, you absolutely can. I just like to do it a little bit smaller so that you get that like pop of the accent color on both sides. And then I'm measuring center-ish, because I generally just eyeball it anyway. And then I'll use 1/2 inch double-sided tape this time, since this is pretty close to a 3/4 inch wide strap in the end. Just be a little bit nicer. Okay, there's that one. And then this print is directional, so I will worry about that when it comes to the main parts of the bag, but for our handles, I'm not concerned. I also now don't have enough width to be able to cut the 18 inch. If I were doing 16 inch, it'd be no problem, but I didn't choose that. Okay. So 1.75 wide by 18. And now if you were concerned with having enough width of your vinyl there, you can just continue to cut into this part of the vinyl, and then more than likely you're gonna have like the same repeat on your strap, which will look really pretty. And then I'm not really worried about finding the center. Again, I myself eyeball it. Made 11 billion and a half straps in my life. I've been bag making for like 10, 11 years. Crazy. There we go. Straps. Done. So, yep, I got my straps done. Now I need to get my crossbody connectors and my handle connectors cut, if we're looking at the additional cut list first. And I've already started with a bunch of rectangular pieces, so I can just kind of keep going from there. I like to cut my handle connectors out all at once, so I'll multiply how long they need to be by how many I need. So 3 times 4 is going to be 12, and I need it to be 2 inches wide. So there's that. And then again, if you need to measure the center, you can. But I've got my connectors. And this could have been that same thing where I cut my crossbody connectors all at once. I just didn't. So zipper panels, I am going to cut 2 out of my exterior. Main zipper tab, I'm omitting and using a zipper end My interior slip pocket, I am changing up quite a bit. I didn't want it to be one that I folded right sides together, sewed around, and then flipped it. I want it to be one where I fold the edges in and then add a little binding at the top. So we got to do some math here. We're going to cut it to that same width, but we are going to double the height and subtract an inch. Because you're not going to have any seam allowance on that. You're just going to be adding a binding. And then for that binding piece, we're going to cut it to 1 inch wide, 1 inch tall, and then the width of that interior slip pocket measurement as it is, and we're going to have extra to cut off. So keep that in mind. Hopefully that doesn't kind of frustrate you or anything, but you can also cut it to the exact that you need, so you would subtract 1 inch from the width of that. But yeah, I'm gonna do that kind of. But you do want to have a little bit extra so you can cut it off if need be, and you want that to be a nice clean edge piece. We're gonna mark ½ inch or 3/8 if you wanted. And we'll add some double-sided tape to that. Again, this is not part of the pattern. This was just something when I was making it, I was like, oh, that would look really nice on the inside of the bag. And it's a little bit easier because you don't have to turn it, that kind of thing. So that was my binding piece. I'll still need the inner zippered pocket. We still need the small interior top, all of our back main pieces, but I'm working on just the rectangular pieces on this additional cut list first, because I feel like I'm super likely to forget that they exist. And we can go ahead and cut this just with this one ruler and then cut it in half. And now, before I cut it in half, I'm going to measure 1 inch from each side, because I'm going to have to do this later when I get to my sewing machine anyway. And then I'll cut it in half. Nice and slow, making sure nothing shifts. And now I have my zipper panel pieces, which I usually like to clip these together, and then I'll put it in my lining pile so I don't forget that I need lining for those. Okay, that's it for this additional cut list. I'm going to put it on my lining stack, and then we'll move on to these pieces. I know for my interior top, I'll need to measure, or I'll need to trace my piece, but these here, I can cut them out. And here's a little trick. These pieces are the exact same size, one just has a cutout. So if you have the measurement, you can use that to cut both and then just trace those extra little pieces. Easy peasy. So I'm gonna grab my 13 by 13 ruler, and this will help me cut these out. And again, you want to measure it twice, cut it once. And if you want to add Decaville light to these, you absolutely can. It is just not something that I feel like this material needs for the structure of the bag that I want. But you are the designer of your bag and you get to make that choice. Okay, and if you're still concerned like it's not quite the right size or anything, you can trace. And I like having that center marked out, to be honest. Yep, we are good. We're good. So there's that one. Oh my gosh. It's so pretty. The green is kind of subtle in it, but it's still like, yes. I love it. Okay, so we're gonna mark our center. And then we're gonna carefully trace out this curve. And then we'll cut that curve out as well. And that is it for the exterior of these two pieces, but we are gonna need lining. And then again, my other little trick is it says to cut 3 of this one and 1 of this one. Cut 4 of this one, trace your little curve. You're done, you did it. And then something that is really helpful, especially if you're at your cutting area and you've got a ruler handy, mark your seam allowance. Just do it. I made the medium size of this one, and I did not mark out my seam allowance, and it messed it up. I was a little too cocky. I was like, I got this. If you are someone who knows you cannot get that 3/8 inch seam allowance, you're gonna have issues with this bag. So what I might recommend that you do, if you know you can only get a 1/4, trace another 1/8 out of this little archway. You can do it on your pattern piece so it's permanent, and then you've made up for what you cannot achieve. Like I know Brittany, my friend Brittany, she'll often use a 1/4 inch on zipper, and it will cause issues down the line with this particular bag. So I just went ahead and marked that out. Can't hurt. Have it done. You can see it's so pretty. This just like softens it so much. I can't wait. All right, interior top. And that's it for the exterior. I'll double check because we got all of our connectors, our handles, crossbody, and then it's just lining. Front main, exterior sides, back main. Now, the way I'm cutting it is not true to how the pattern is dictating you to do it. I didn't cut it all the pieces from the exterior, all the pieces from the contrast. I'm mixing it up, and that is something that you can do on your own, but it does make it a little bit more confusing if you are new to bag making. So just keep that in mind as you're cutting yours out. There's nothing wrong with the way it's written at all. This is just my own psychotic way of doing things. Okay. And again, my print is directional, so I'm following that as I cut this. I flipped it over so that I can trace this top piece and not worry about marking up my vinyl. Perfect. And then we're gonna move on to our lining. The lining I'm using, like I said earlier, it's called Renew Canvas. It's made from recycled water bottles. It is available on my website, and I personally don't think it needs interfacing. You may feel differently and you can interface it. Just be careful with that iron. But I think like it has a center divider. If you're making the medium size and you intend to put a laptop in it, you could add a little bit of foam or a little bit of fleece to give it some padding. Just make sure you're cutting that out of the seam allowance. But on the small size, I would not recommend it. It's just a little bit of overkill. But if you're using a cotton lining or anything like that, then yes, I would interface, because that is going to tend to be a little bit thinner. And I don't want to say wear down over time, but kind of soften over time. All right, and I know I've got this straight line here. I'm just going to line that up. So pretty. And I still have those center markings, which really come in handy for this bag. That's it for my exterior fabrics. So we'll move on to the lining. I'll go ahead and cut this really quick. I'm going to use these Kai 7250 scissors. They're really heavy and they cut nicely. And I feel like it's just a little bit easier to go those long stretches of cutting. Nice and clean. And we're slowly closing the scissors as we go along the curve. Now I'm at a nice straight side, so I'll move all the way down. Around the curve. And matching back up as clean as I can. And now for the inside, I'm going to use my rotary cutter and ruler. I'm going to line up my ruler on that line. And then with a nice sharp tip, we'll cut in and then across. That's nice. All right, and then normally I keep 1/8 inch double-sided tape over here so that I can tape across the top, but I didn't do that, so we'll just set that aside for now. I'm gonna kind of clean up my space. I don't foresee needing my scissors for the next piece. I'm not gonna worry about that. Grab all of our pieces. I don't need that. Not gonna need tape right now. So the right side of this has like a nice little woven texture. The back side is a little bit darker, and when you scratch it, you'll see like a bit of a white cast on it, which is not the case for the front of the fabric. But it just has such a nice structure. This color is toe bean pink. My friend Brittany likes to call one of our vinyls toe bean pink, and it just wasn't a name we could use for it. And so when this came in, we all voted it had to be toe beans. Toe beans pink. Not to be confused with toe bean pink, which she calls the other one. Okay, so I'm gonna get started first with the pattern piece that is not a rectangle. So that is our small interior main, and then we've got our small interior bottom panel, but everything else I can cut with a rotary cutter. I mean, even this I'll cut with my rotary cutter, but we want to avoid the selvage edge. I'm going to line this up on the fold. I like to use these pattern weights. These pattern weights are from the Ditto sewing projector, which is not worth your money. But these pattern weights are great. I have tried to find something similar from suppliers, and they're like, that's way too much metal, you're insane. And I'm like, okay. So I don't foresee those happening anytime soon. But they're so cute. This piece does have a very slight angle to the top. So if you need to do something to denote which is which, please do. And I'm just going to cut a little tiny angle in the corner so that I know which are my centers. And then I can lay that on my heat press and give it a little bit of a press when I'm done cutting. And you really want to try your best and make sure you're not adding width to your lining as you are cutting this out. And what I mean by that is you're not giving yourself too much of a folded edge. You know, you don't want to see the fabric when you line up that folded edge. You want it to be right on top. Otherwise you're adding width, which would create a lining that's not going to fit just right. All right, so those are my two lining pieces. It says to cut fusible woven interfacing as well, but if you're using a material that you know you don't need it, then you don't need it. You just put it away. Okay. Now these pieces are cut on the fold, and we're going to need several of them. I think I might do these after because I've still got some nice square edges to go off of. I like to do that. I like to keep the squares together. So I know that my zipper panel is the width of this. However, something that I like to do is with the lining fabric, I tend to cut it a little bit wider than it needs to be to make up for bulk so that it sits nicer. So I might cut it like a 1/4 inch wider than it really needs to be, but definitely make it the same length as the pattern intends it to be. And this is something I started doing when I was working with waterproof canvas a lot. I don't work with waterproof canvas as much, but I'm still kind of in the habit of it because I do think it makes it nicer in the end. And then on the wrong side, we're going to measure that 1 inch, and I'll clip it. And then we have one more to do. So I'm cutting it longer than it needs to be so that I can square it up this other side. Clipping that together, and that's going to be it for our zipper panels. And now we've got this little chunk here. And it's perfect for our big slip pocket. Yes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overcut it for now. And then I've got some nice squared edges that I can really perfect the size it needs to be. Dang. Went a little wiggly. All right, so the width on the wrong side is where I want to measure 1 inch. Because I'm going to be adding double-sided tape, folding the edges that way, and then folding it up, and then adding our binding to the top. Kind of creates a sweet little pocket. So we'll add that to our pile. I'm going to grab this back because I need zipper tabs. I'm like, oh great, perfect. And I have my little 1 1/4 inch wide ruler. Sometimes I think when I'm cutting out a bag, I like to see how many rulers I can really use. Like, I have all of them. I have designed all of them. Use them, you know? I did it for a reason, so we're not going to do that. We got that. Interior slip pocket. Okay. Now we're going to need interior zipper pocket. There's those pieces. I like to keep a clip on them, and I'll usually even put them in with my hardware so that I don't misplace them. Okay. So then we have our 2 pieces for the interior zippered pocket to cut. And you really don't need to be too picky about how perfect this is cut. You just want some nice straight sides. And I will usually lay this in the stack with my zipper overlay so I know what that piece is for. But like, I've got a weird edge over here that I'm not going to worry about. It's only slightly shorter, and it's not going to mess me up in the long run. So there's that, and then that is it for our additional cut list. We got everything, and I can put this back in the container. Good to go. And I know this seems like a lot to cut out, but when you kind of take it in little bite-sized chunks the way we've been doing it, it feels a lot less overwhelming. Alrighty. Okay. So, I know I've got a nice straight side here, so we can go ahead and work on the rest of our pieces. We're going to need 4 lining pieces for the small interior divider pocket. You could choose to do 2 different prints to help with how much fabric that's going to take up, but I'm going to go ahead and start with that. Those 2 pieces, and then we're going to need 2 lining. We're already cutting out lining, but I think you knew what I meant. And then if I had the 1/8 inch double-sided tape, I would go ahead and add a strip at the top of all of those pieces, because that's where our zipper is going to get attached. And now that is it for our small interior divider pocket, so I can move that out of the way. And then we're down to 6 pieces we need to cut from our lining. So practically finished. Now I know I've got a little straight area over here that we can cut. And now since I need 4 of the exact same one, I wanted to make sure that I had enough area to create the same footprint in the piece. So the height is the same and my width. I'm kind of cutting it backwards from what it needs to be, but I wanted to use a larger space of my lining. And again, technically you need 3 and then 1, but you can just make it 4 and then trace your little pieces. Trace your little pieces. So there's my 3. And there's my 4. Now I've got this little strip here. We're done with the small back main. I can put that away, but I'll keep one of these to trace my small front main onto. We're done with our ruler. Let's put that away. Pretty much done with all the rulers. We can hang them back up. And then we can trace these pieces. Got a nice area here. There we go. And this is another one where it can't hurt to snip your centers. Should have done that to my bottom panel before I added the Decaville Heavy, but here we are. Can't change it now. So I'm starting at the top curve, but I don't go so far where it feels unnatural to turn it. I'll work my way up to it. Now, the center divider in this pattern is a huge draw for it. People really enjoy that center divider. It is a really cool technique to know, and it is fully divided. Let's say you don't want that. Your skills are not quite there and you're just not comfortable with it. What you would do is omit the divider and cut your lining out of your exterior base. That's it. And then it would just be made like a normal bag. You would attach the linings just without the divider, and then you would attach the base at the same seam allowance as the exterior. So it doesn't have to be scary and overwhelming. You can do it even if you don't like that center divider. They are not in the instructions, and Jenny has no plans to write that in the instructions, but I wanted to mention it in case you're like, oh, that's not for me. So this is my last step. I just needed to trace out that curve. We've already traced our seam allowance onto our exterior piece, so I'm not worried of having to do that again, but you could if you wanted. And let's say you don't really think you can handle doing this double zippered pocket, which again is another like draw to the bag. It's kind of a challenge and it looks really cool. Just cut the same as the front. Or let's say you don't want any zippered pockets or slip pockets at all because this front here becomes a slip pocket. Let's say you don't want that. Don't cut any lining. Skip all the lining. You're just going to add your strap connectors and your top accent panel, and that's it. And that's it. If you are choosing to do that and you're using vinyl materials, I would add Decaville Light. The reason I'm omitting it is because my lining on both sides is going to add quite a bit of structure, so I didn't want to add extra weight, bulk, and structure when it already has enough. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and organize these into little piles. So I'm going to put these together because I'll need them together when I go to my machine. And then we'll have that one, which becomes the back, together. Here's that top. And then these two go together along with the top panel. So I'm creating like little bundles, more or less. These are bottom accent pieces. These are going to get clipped and sewn together, so I can do that really quick. Why not? This is our top lining, so I'm going to put that in my little lining pile. We can also put our zipper panels and our zipper tabs into that pile. We've got our straps here. We can go ahead and clip together. Hopefully this is helpful in helping you feel a little more organized. This is our little binding piece for our slip pocket, so we can put that there. Straps together. These are our side panel connectors, so we can clip those together. And then these are our strap connectors, so I'm going to put this in the same pile as my crossbody strap. So I'll work on my lining after everything else. So I'm going to put that in the bottom of my stack. And that's it. We'll need to grab a zipper end. But other than that, the Regina Phalange bag is fully cut. It's ready to go, ready to sew. I'm excited. I hope you'll join me. If you do not want to wait to put this together until I'm back, you can make it with Jenny. She has video tutorials for all of her patterns. And definitely check her out and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Bye. Why am I out of breath? 1 hour. Dang. Dang. Oh, thank God.